My girlfriend's dad offered me $50,000 to leave her, and I honestly thought it was a sick joke at first. We'd been together a year. Serious enough that I'd met her family more than once, and every dinner at their house felt like an interview I never applied for. Her name was Claire, and she was the kind of person who made you forget you were stressed just by walking into the room. Her father, Richard, was the opposite. Calm, smiling, always polite, but with eyes that made you feel like you were being priced. Not judged, priced. He never raised his voice, never insulted me, never said anything directly rude. He just asked questions that sounded casual and landed like traps. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you have savings? Do you feel a man should be able to provide? Claire would squeeze my hand under the table and roll her eyes like, sorry, he's like this. I kept telling myself it was normal rich family nonsense. Until the night Richard invited me to talk privately after dinner. He didn't do it in his office like a movie villain. He did it in the kitchen, while the staff cleaned quietly in the background, like he wanted the threat to feel normal. He poured 2 glasses of expensive whiskey and handed me one. I didn't drink. He smiled and said, I'm going to be direct because I respect you. That line should have warned me. Then he slid an envelope across the counter. Thick, heavy, the kind of envelope that doesn't hold papers. I opened it and saw a cashier's check with my name, already filled out. $50,000. My throat went dry. I looked up at him and laughed once, confused. What is this? Richard kept smiling. A clean exit, he said. You walk away, you don't hurt Claire, and you get a head start in life. I said, are you serious? He nodded. Very. You're a decent guy, he continued, but you're not permanent. Claire is impulsive. You're a phase. Phase. The word hit hard because he said it like a fact. I pushed the check back and said, I'm not taking this. Richard didn't move. You should, he said gently, because I'm not paying you to be cruel. I'm paying you to be smart. I told him I loved Claire. He nodded like I'd said something cute. That's the thing about love, he replied. It makes men do irrational things. This is me offering you a rational alternative. I stood up to leave, and Richard's smile thinned. If you refuse, he said softly, the situation becomes complicated. Complicated. A clean word for dirty actions. I froze, looked at him, and asked, Are you threatening me? Richard raised both hands, slightly like I was being dramatic. No, he said. I'm protecting my daughter, and my family doesn't lose. I walked out with my heart pounding, got in my car, and sat there for a full minute just breathing. Then I did something I didn't expect myself to do. I called Claire and told her everything. Not angrily, not to force her to choose. I just told her the truth. She went silent for a second, then said, He did what? Her voice shook. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He's done this before. That sentence made my stomach drop. Done this before meant it wasn't a one-time outburst. It was a system. Claire promised she'd confront him, but I told her not to do it alone. She said she'd handle it, and I believed her because I wanted to. The next day she called me crying, saying her dad denied it completely, claimed I misunderstood, and told her I was trying to manipulate her. He turned it around in less than 12 hours. Then things started happening to me that didn't feel like coincidence. My manager at work asked me into his office and said HR had received an anonymous complaint accusing me of harassment toward a coworker. I just stared at him, confused. I'd never even been written up. HR said they needed to investigate, so I was placed on leave. On leave. That same afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. A man's voice said calmly, You should have taken the money. Then he hung up. My hands were shaking. Claire texted me. My dad says you're unstable and obsessed. He told my mom you're dangerous. Dangerous. That was the word they use when they want people to stop listening to you. I realized then that Richard's offer wasn't a gift. It was the easy version of the story. Refuse it, and he'd write a different story. One where I wasn't a boyfriend, I was a threat. And the worst part was I could already feel the world tilting toward believing him, because rich men don't need truth. They just need doubt. The first thing I did after HR put me on leave was ask for complaint in writing. They wouldn't show me the full details, just a summary. Unwanted messages, aggressive behavior, creating an unsafe environment. It was vague on purpose, because vague accusations are harder to disprove. My manager looked uncomfortable and said, "It's anonymous, so we have to take it seriously." I wanted to scream that anyone could write anything, but I forced myself to stay calm. Calm was survival now. I went home, opened my phone, and started pulling every message thread I'd ever had with coworkers. Nothing. No flirting, no threats, no weird jokes. Just normal work talk. I emailed HR a short response. I deny the allegations. I request the specific dates and examples, and I'm willing to cooperate. Then I called Claire. She answered immediately, voice low. "He's doing it," she whispered. "He's doing exactly what he did to my last boyfriend." Last boyfriend. My stomach twisted. What happened? I asked. Claire hesitated like she hated the memory. My dad told everyone he was unstable. Then he got him fired, she said. Then there was police. Police. I felt cold. Claire, did you tell him I refused the money? She went quiet. That silence told me yes. She said, I confronted him. He denied it. I told him to stop. He said he's saving me. And then he told my mom you're manipulating me. Manipulating. Another clean label. I asked Claire if she could get proof of the check, like security footage, bank record, anything. She said her dad keeps everything handled through people, not paperwork. That made sense. People can be pressured. Paper can't. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. A text this time. You're making her cry. End it. No signature. No threat. Just blame. The message wasn't just to scare me. It was to make me feel guilty enough to leave. I screenshotted it immediately. Then another text. HR isn't the last stop. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. I called my friend Daniel, the most level-headed person I knew. He listened quietly as I explained the bribe, the HR complaint, the unknown calls. Daniel said, document everything. You're dealing with someone who uses institutions as weapons. Institutions. That was the word. HR, police, courts, media, anything that looks official so people assume it's true. Daniel told me to save voicemails, take screenshots, and write down a timeline with dates and times. He also told me to get a lawyer if it escalated. I wasn't rich. I didn't have a family attorney. But I could afford a consultation, and I could not afford to be naive. The next morning, it escalated. 2 police officers showed up at my apartment for a welfare check. They said they received a call that I was in a mental crisis and might harm myself or others. I just stood in my doorway, stunned. I'd never had cops at my home in my life. My neighbors peeked through curtains. One officer asked politely, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes. I have no idea why you're here." The other officer asked if there were weapons inside. I said no. They looked around the entryway and asked if I had anyone who could confirm my state. Confirm, like I was guilty of being unstable until proven otherwise. I called Daniel on speaker and said, "Tell him I'm fine." Daniel did. The officers left, but the damage was done. Now there was a police record of a welfare check at my address. A seed of doubt planted officially. And Richard would use that seed later. Claire called me sobbing. "He told me you were threatening yourself," she said. "He said he's scared you'll hurt me." I felt sick. "Claire, I've never said anything like that." I told her. She said, I know, but he's convincing my mom." That was the real target. Isolate Claire by making her family think I was dangerous. Then my HR contact emailed. "We need you to attend a formal interview regarding the complaint. Please bring any relevant evidence." Formal interview. It felt like I was walking into a trap. And when I arrived at the office, I realized it was worse. Sitting in a room with HR was a woman I'd never met before, introduced as external counsel. External counsel for an anonymous complaint? That's not normal. That's expensive. Someone was funding pressure. The lawyer asked me questions that weren't about the complaint details. They were about my relationship with Claire. Do you have screenshots of conversations with her? Have you ever been asked to leave her family home? Have you ever raised your voice? They were building a narrative, not investigating work behavior. I answered carefully, short, factual. When I asked to see the alleged messages, HR said they couldn't disclose because it might identify the complainant. Convenient. I left shaking with anger I couldn't show. Outside, another unknown texted my phone. Sign the statement and this ends. Statement? I hadn't been offered any statement. Then a second message. Admit you harassed her. Resign quietly. Take a payout. Payout. My blood went cold. This was the same play as a bribe, just with a different script. Confess to something, resign, disappear. If I refused, they'd escalate again. I realized then that Richard wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to force me into one of two outcomes. Leave with money and silence, or leave with ruined name. And I was running out of options unless I created leverage he couldn't buy. That night I stopped thinking like a boyfriend and started thinking like a defendant. If Richard wanted to frame me, the only way out was to build a record strong enough that his story couldn't stand up under scrutiny. Daniel helped me make a timeline. The dinner, the $50,000 check, the complicated threat, my call to Claire, the HR leave, the anonymous text, the welfare check, the external counsel interview. Dates, times, screenshots, everything. I also did something I hated. I assumed my phone might be watched in some way, so I moved the most important files to a separate USB drive and gave it to Daniel to hold, sealed like a dead man's switch. If anything happened to me or I got arrested on something fake, Daniel would have the record. The next move was the hardest. I needed proof that the bribe happened, not just my word. Claire was scared, but she was also furious, and that fury finally turned into action. She told me she could try to get the check stub or bank paperwork from her father's office because Richard kept everything important in a safe. The problem was access. Her mother would notice. Richard would notice. But Claire said something that made me realize she was done being controlled. If I don't do this now, he'll do it to every person I ever love. We made a plan that didn't involve breaking into anything like a movie. Claire would go to the office under the excuse of looking for old family photos for a charity event. While Richard was out, she'd look for any trace of the cashier's check, receipt duplicate, envelope, anything, then take photos and put it back. Not steal, just document. Meanwhile, I contacted an employment attorney for a consultation. I explained the HR complaint, the external counsel, and the welfare check. The attorney's reaction was immediate. This sounds like retaliation and defamation using institutional pressure. Do not resign. Do not sign anything. Request the complaint particulars in writing again, and ask HR to preserve evidence. Preserve evidence. That phrase mattered. Because once you ask for preservation, destroying anything becomes riskier for them. The attorney drafted a short email. I deny allegations. I request specific dates, messages, and identities of the policy violated. I request confirmation that any digital evidence will be preserved, emails, chat logs, security footage, interview notes. And I request that external counsel disclose or retain them in this matter. I sent it. Within an hour, HR replied with a colder tone. We will respond after review. They didn't like being asked who was paying the lawyer. The next day, Claire texted me. I found something. My stomach flipped. She sent 2 photos taken in bad light. A cashier's check purchase receipt with my name and $50,000, and a note paper clipped to it with Richard's handwriting. If refuses, HR/police route. I stare at the photo until my vision blurred. HR/police route. He literally wrote the playbook. I asked Claire if she was safe. She said, he almost caught me. He came home early. I put it back, but I got the photos. Those photos were my leverage, not in the sense that I was going to expose him online immediately, in the sense that if Richard pushed too far, I could prove intent. Daniel told me to forward the photos to him and the attorney, so they existed outside my phone. I did. Then, because I had proof of the plan smear, we made the next move. Go on offense without looking crazy. My attorney advised filing a police report, not accusing Richard of everything, just reporting harassment and anonymous threats tied to a known dispute, and attaching the texts and call logs. Again, not because police would arrest a rich man, because it created a record that I reported intimidation before any false accusation escalated. We also drafted a letter to Richard's legal address, not Richard directly, stating, "We have documentation of an attempted bribe and plan retaliatory actions. Cease and desist harassment. Preserve all records. Further attempt to contact me or interfere with my employment will be considered willful misconduct." It was polite, professional, and designed to make Richard realize I wasn't alone anymore. When that letter hit, the tone changed immediately. The unknown number stopped texting for almost 12 hours. HR suddenly scheduled a follow-up meeting with a different HR manager. Claire said her father was unusually quiet at home, like he was calculating. Then the real twist landed. Claire called me at midnight whispering, "My dad is meeting someone tomorrow. He said, we'll make him confess or we'll bury him." Bury him. My stomach turned. I asked how she heard it. She said she walked past the study and heard him on speaker with someone. Maybe the external counsel, maybe a fixer. Claire begged me not to confront him. "He's scarier when he's calm," she said. I told her we were going to protect ourselves legally. Claire whispered, "He's planning something bigger than HR." And that's when my attorney said the words that made my blood go cold. If he's escalating, the next step is often a criminal accusation, something that gets you arrested fast. Arrested fast meant my life could be destroyed in a day. So we prepared for the worst. I saved my location sharing with Daniel. I kept my phone recording option ready. And I stopped going anywhere alone. Because I could feel the moment approaching when Richard would realize he couldn't buy my silence and would try to force it instead. The next morning, before I even finished my coffee, my building manager called and said 2 men had come asking about me. They said they're looking for a tenant named you, he told me. They flashed a badge, maybe private investigator. I didn't give them anything. My stomach dropped. Richard had moved from indirect pressure to physical presence. Not violence, visibility. Make me feel watched. Make me make mistakes. Then I got an email from HR. The complaint had expanded and now included an allegation that I had accessed a co-worker's personal information through internal systems. That didn't even make sense. I didn't have access to anything like that. But it was a clever escalation because it sounded technical, hard for a regular person to disprove quickly, and it painted me as someone who crosses lines. My attorney told me not to go into any meeting alone and to request that all interviews be recorded or summarized in writing. I forwarded everything to her and told my manager I would not speak without counsel present. My manager, who had always liked me, sounded scared. "They're saying it's serious," he said. I could hear the word behind his voice. Liability. That's what Richard was buying. Fear of liability. Around noon, Claire texted, "Dad knows I went into his office." My heart slammed. She said he'd been cold all morning, asking her weird questions about trust and loyalty, then casually mentioned the safe in his study. The message was clear. He knew something moved, even if he didn't know what. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A man's voice said calm, amused, "You think you're clever. You're not. If you don't stop, we'll report what you did to Claire." Report what you did to Claire. That was the moment I understood the new plan. Flipped the script from harassment at work to domestic threat. It didn't matter if it was true. It mattered that police would show up and Claire's family would circle the wagons. 15 minutes later, my attorney called me and said, "Do not be alone with Claire right now. If he's planning a criminal accusation, he'll want a witness or a recording that makes you look aggressive." I hated hearing that because I love Claire, but love doesn't protect you from a smear. It makes you easier to manipulate. That evening, Claire asked to meet, saying she needed to talk away from her house. My instinct was to run to her. Instead, I did what my attorney said. We met in a public place with cameras, in the corner of a busy cafe, and I told Daniel to sit 2 tables away, pretending to work. Claire arrived pale, eyes red. "He's threatening to cut me off," she whispered. "He said if I don't end it, he'll make sure you can never come near me again." I told her we had photos of the bribe receipt and his HR/police route note. Claire's eyes widened, then she looked terrified. "He'll say I forged it," she said. "He'll say you made me." That's what Richard always did. Deny, reverse, accuse. Claire told me her father had a meeting tomorrow with someone from a firm, and someone she'd never seen before, a man who wasn't security, but carried himself like enforcement. He said it's time to finish this, she whispered. Then she grabbed my hand and said, please don't do anything stupid. He wants you to snap. He wants you to snap. That line hit hard, because it explained everything. HR complaints, welfare checks, anonymous texts, investigators showing up, pressure until I react emotionally, then label me unstable. My attorney suggested we preemptively file for a protective order based on harassment and intimidation, using the anonymous messages, the PI visit, and the bribe documentation. Protective order sounded extreme, but she explained it simply. It's not about winning. It's about creating legal consequences for contact and building a record before he escalates. We filed that night. The next day, Richard made his biggest move. Police showed up at my apartment with a warrant to seize my phone and laptop for an investigation into threats and extortion. Extortion. I felt like the air left my lungs. The lead detective said they had a complaint alleging I demanded money from the family to leave Claire alone and threatened to ruin them if they didn't pay. It was the bribe story inverted into a crime. I almost laughed from shock, but I didn't, because laughter looks unstable. I said calmly, I have counsel. Please contact my attorney. The detective said, we can still seize devices. My attorney arrived fast and asked one question. Do you have the original complaint and supporting evidence? The detective hesitated and said it was sensitive due to family status. My attorney stayed calm and said, then you should be aware we have documentation of a prior bribery attempt and retaliatory threats. If you proceed without preserving both sides, this becomes an issue. The detective's face changed slightly, not sympathetic, cautious, because now there was risk. They took my phone anyway, but my attorney ensured they logged everything, and she handed them a preservation notice for all communications from Richard's side, including the anonymous number they used. After they left, my apartment felt violated. Claire called crying, saying her dad told her, see, he's dangerous. Dangerous again. But this time I wasn't alone with my word. I had the photos. I had the texts. I had the timeline. And now I had something even bigger. Proof that Richard had escalated to a false criminal accusation, which meant he was no longer just trying to end a relationship. He was trying to destroy my life permanently. Part 5 would be the countermove that ended his control, how he turned his own paperwork against him, forced the investigation to look at the bribe receipt and HR/police route note, and made Richard pay a public price he couldn't buy off quietly. The moment my devices were seized, Richard's plan was obvious. Starve me of my own proof, isolate me from Claire, and let official suspicion do the rest. If police think you're an extortionist, HR doesn't wait for a verdict. Friends don't wait for a verdict. Even Claire's mother wouldn't wait for a verdict. Richard didn't need me convicted. He just needed me labeled. But he made one mistake. He assumed the only copy of the bribe proof lived on my phone. It didn't. Daniel had the sealed drive. My attorney had the photos. And Claire, whether her father liked it or not, had already become a witness. My attorney contacted the detective's supervisor and requested a formal meeting to provide exculpatory evidence. The detective tried to brush it off at first. We'll review everything. But my attorney used the only language institutions respect, liability. She said calmly, we have evidence this complaint is retaliatory and predates the alleged extortion narrative. If you ignore it, it exposes the department to a suppression problem and civil claims. 2 days later, they agreed to meet. In that meeting, my attorney handed over a clean packet, timeline, screenshot of anonymous threats, proof of the welfare check pattern, HR escalation dates, and then the core, the cashier's check purchase receipt with my name and a handwritten note clipped to it. If refuses, HR/police route. The room went silent. The detective's face didn't show emotion, but his eyes stayed on that note longer than anything else. Because it wasn't just proof of a bribe. It was proof of intent to weaponize institutions. My attorney explained that Richard offered money to end the relationship. I refused, and retaliatory actions began immediately. HR complaint, welfare check, anonymous threats, then a flipped criminal complaint alleging I was an extortionist. The detective asked, "How do we know this handwriting is his?" My attorney answered, "We can subpoena other documents for comparison, or you can simply ask the family to produce the original. If it's fake, they'll welcome verification." That last line mattered. Innocent people want verification. Guilty people stall. The detective asked for Claire's statement. Claire was terrified, but she chose to speak, not in person at a station where her father's influence might be felt, but through counsel in a recorded setting. She confirmed her father had a history of trying to buy off boyfriends, confirmed he denied everything when confronted, and confirmed he told her he would handle it if she didn't end the relationship. She didn't have to say he framed him. The pattern said it. Then Daniel did something brilliant. He filed a formal request to my employer demanding preservation of the anonymous complaint metadata, external counsel engagement letters, and any communications that cause the investigation to expand. HR panicked. HR doesn't like being dragged into a criminal retaliation timeline. Within a week, my employer's tone shifted from "we're investigating you" to "we're reviewing process irregularities." Process irregularities is corporate for "someone pressured us and we don't want to be sued." The external counsel who'd been questioning me suddenly vanished from emails. HR asked if I'd be willing to return under a different manager, pending outcome. They were trying to back away without admitting they'd been used. Meanwhile, the police investigation cracked at the weak point. Richard's story required evidence that I demanded money. Texts, calls, an email, anything. There wasn't any because it was a lie. When they pulled the alleged threatening messages, they were vague screenshots without full headers, easy to fabricate. My attorney asked for originals and device extraction. Richard's legal team resisted, claiming privacy. Privacy, the same word he'd used like a weapon. The detective now had to make a choice. Pursue me with shaky evidence, or pursue the possibility of a false report by a powerful man. They didn't arrest Richard. That wasn't the win. The win was that they quietly closed the extortion angle due to lack of supporting evidence, and noted the dispute as civil/harassment related, which killed the leverage Richard wanted. My devices were returned. The case didn't become my identity. Then we went for the real throat. Court. My attorney filed a petition for a protective order and a civil claim for defamation and intentional interference with employment, attaching the bribe receipt, the HR/police route note, the anonymous threat timeline, the welfare check record, and HR documentation showing an unusual escalation tied to external counsel. Richard's team tried to settle immediately, not because they cared about peace, but because discovery is rich people's nightmare. Discovery forces emails, invoices, engagement letters, call logs, and fixer communications into daylight. Richard offered numbers so high it felt surreal, plus a demand that Claire and I separate permanently and sign a non-disparagement clause. My attorney said no to the separation condition, and yes to one thing only: enforceable no contact, and a written retraction sent to my employer and to police investigators stating the accusation was withdrawn as mistaken. Richard refused at first. His ego wouldn't let him retract. Then the judge set a discovery schedule. Suddenly Richard became flexible, because money can buy silence, but it can't buy your emails back once a court orders production. The settlement that finally happened wasn't cinematic. It was humiliating for him, and the only way that matters to a man like that, on paper. The family sent a formal withdrawal letter to police. A separate letter to my employer's HR clarified there was no basis for claims I harassed or accessed personal data, and my employment record was amended. Richard agreed to a strict no-contact order through attorneys only, and any future intimidation would trigger penalties. There was a payout, yes, but the payout wasn't a victory. The victory was that his favorite weapon, turning institutions into his private hands, was documented, challenged, and forced to retreat. Claire, and I didn't get a fairy tale ending. That's the part people hate hearing, but it's the truth. She was still trapped in a family that equated control with love. After the settlement, she told me, crying, "I hate him for this, but I'm scared of what he'll do if I leave." I didn't blame her. I couldn't. I loved her, but I also understood something painfully clear. You can win a legal fight and still lose the person caught in the middle. We broke up quietly a month later, Not because Richard won, but because the cost of being together had become constant fear, and fear corrodes everything. The last thing Claire said to me was, "You were the first one who didn't take the money." I told her, "I didn't refuse because I'm brave. I refused because I didn't want my life to be owned." Months later, I heard through Daniel that Richard stopped trying to buy boyfriends off, at least a loud way, not because he learned empathy, but because he learned risk. He learned that one ordinary person with a timeline, a lawyer, and proof can make his clean games messy. And that's what he fears most. Messy can't control.